I led them with cords of kindness, with the bands of love. And I became to them as one who eases the yoke on their jaws, and I bent down to them and fed them.
Brother Tyndall here for something to chew on, coming to you from the deep south of Alabama. Alright, I had someone ask me a question, and I'm going to attempt to answer it in the way I understand things. Now, I know everybody has their own different beliefs on this subject, because this is one of those ones that there's a lot of beliefs on this. So I'll read the passage that's concerning the question first. Then I'm going to explain it the best I can the way I understand it. Okay, we're going to come out of, it's going to be the King James Version today. It's going to be 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. And we're going to be reading a well-known passage that most people know concerning, it's the place where in the scriptures we get the term rapture, which actually is not in our Bible. It's not even in the Greek Bible. The term rapture comes from, if I'm not mistaken, it's the Latin term raptura, which basically is where we get the term. But it's not in our Bibles, and that's why a lot of people fight against, oh, there's no such thing as a rapture. It talks about it right here. But anyway, that's not for today. We're just going to read this, and I'll explain to you. All right, 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 13 through 18, out of the King James. It says, "But I would not have you to be ignorant, brethren, concerning them which are asleep, that you sorrow not, even as others which have no hope. For if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so them also which sleep in Jesus will God bring with him. Verse 15. For this we say unto you, by the word of the Lord, that we which are alive and remain unto the coming of the Lord shall not prevent them which are asleep. Verse 16. For the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trump of God, and the dead in Christ shall rise first. Verse 17. Then we which are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so shall we ever be with the Lord. Verse 18. Wherefore comfort one another with these words. Now her question was this. She said, I'm confused. She said, I thought when we died, we went to be with the Lord. And I'm assuming that by reading this passage, she's reading that word sleep, and as most people see it, as a state of unconsciousness where you're not aware of what's going on around you. Now, okay, here's the thing. Some people believe, like as she said, she thought, or she believed, that when you die, your spirit instantaneously goes to be with the Lord. Now, there are others that believe that when you die, you go into the ground, into a state of unconsciousness, and you're aware of nothing that's going on until the moment that this happens, and you're snatched up, or you're snatched out of the ground. Wherever your spirit is, I don't know. I couldn't tell you that. But your spirit becomes aware, and then you're with the Lord. I know people, they believe one of the two ways. Now here's my thing. What if it's both? And I know you're asking yourself, how? How can it be both? That's what I'm going to explain to you. And this is one of those places, it's a perfect example of what I talk about people all the time. You gotta take out what you think and what you know. When you come to the table of interpretation, leave your preconceived notions, what you think the Bible says, what you've probably been taught in the past, which more than likely is wrong. Now, I'm not saying I'm right by any means, just something to consider, give you a new perspective to see things in. And that's what this deals with, perspective, how you see things. All we know from experiential perspective is this right here, our flesh. That's all we know. Because when I say know, I mean intimately know. Yada. That's what we know. Why? Because that's the only thing we've experienced. Okay. Now let's go. Let's go to Isaiah 57:15. I'm going to read a verse to you. And I'm going to try to explain this the best I know how. Isaiah, that's going to be to the left. A pretty good chunk. It's going to be back in the Old Testament in the major prophets or the greater prophets, whichever term you want to apply on. All right, Isaiah 57. Isaiah 57:15 reads as following from the King James Version. Now this is speaking of God the Father, Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh, the Elohim Most High. It says, "For thus saith the high and lofty one that inhabiteth eternity, whose name is holy. I dwell in the high and holy place, with him also that is of a contrite and humble spirit, to revive the spirit of the humble and to revive the heart of the contrite ones." What I'm going for is the phrase, that inhabiteth eternity. Let's look that up in a couple of other versions, or a couple of other translations. Just see how they have it worded in there. Here, let me get on my handy dandy phone app. Makes this quick and easy looking things up. Isaiah 57:15, right there, 15. All right, let's see. What's some of the translations people use? Here we go. The New Living Translation, the NLT says, "the high and lofty one who lives in eternity." The NIV says, "who lives forever." The NASB, New American Standard Bible, says, "who lives forever." New King James, "who inhabits eternity." ESV, "who inhabits eternity." The NET, I believe that's the New English Translation, "the one who rules forever." The CSB, Christian Standard Bible, "who lives forever." Revised Standard Version, "who inhabits eternity." The ASV, that's what the NASB is based off of, is the ASV, if you didn't know. "one that inhabiteth eternity." The Darby Bible, anyway, "one that inhabiteth eternity." Yeah, that's about all the ones I'll read right there. Now to try to explain this so you can understand it. Like I was saying, we often read the scriptures with a preconceived notion, or it's like this. We'll read the scriptures and we'll see a word in there, and to us that word means whatever. Well, oftentimes the way we define a word is not what the word actually means biblically. You have to define biblical terms by using the Bible. So what I'm getting at is the understanding of something. We bring that to the table of interpretation, and that influences the way we interpret what we read. So, with that said, let's see if I can give an example. I know this is going to be a crude example, but it's the best one to get you to understand what I'm saying. Here in America, we wouldn't eat a dog. It's just socially unacceptable. That's just, oh my God, that's crazy. But you go to certain parts of the world and they eat dog and they don't think anything about it. You see what I'm saying? It's the environment that you were raised in that causes you to think or to perceive the world around you in a certain way. Now, if you were raised in that culture, it wouldn't seem wrong to you because everybody does it, and that's just the way it is. Remove yourself from that thought. That, I'm not saying eating a dog, I'm just in general. Remove yourself. Take all that out when you read the Bible. When you see something and you think, go look some of these words up and define them using the Bible itself. Like yesterday, I was explaining something to somebody, and one of the words that come up was prosperity. And to us, in our fleshly sense, we think wealth, or health, wealth, living a long life and all that kind of stuff, being successful in your business and all that. That's not the way the Bible defines prosperity. You see what I'm saying? Prosperity is defined as having the Lord on your side. The Lord going before you to fight your battles. But you see what I'm saying? How we, in our human understanding, we may define a word in the scriptures as this, but in fact, if you look that word up in the scriptures and read it, you might come to the understanding of, wait a minute, what I thought that word meant doesn't mean the way the Bible uses it, the context the Bible uses it. Okay, so all that said, this is back to the 1 Thessalonians 4. This is one of the places where we read into the text our understanding. See, now okay, and how it says that God inhabits eternity. Okay, we understand that right now in this physical existence, this prime material plane, this temporal plane that we live in, we know everything has sustenance. There's matter. There's something here that we can touch and feel and taste and see and pick up and drop. Everything's got matter. And how do you measure like mass and volume? Length, width, and height. 3 dimensions. Length, width, and height. Okay. But there's a fourth one that a lot of people don't realize. We live in 4 dimensions. The fourth one is time. It's time. Now, we don't think about it because, like in school, when you took basic math, you always, what's the perimeter or the volume of the square? Length and width. Okay, now you make it a cube and that adds the 3rd dimension. So what are the length, width, and height? But you never dealt with time in your basic courses of math, so we don't think about it. But if you took higher math, which I didn't, but I have basic understanding of some of these things. If you take higher math, you might deal with time. It's the 4th dimension. Einstein, theory of relativity, all that stuff. He discovered all this stuff. But it's like this. We see our physical universe, prime material plane, the temporal plane, this reality that we live in, length, width, and height, and in time. Like say it this way. Say you make plans with somebody. You got a date with somebody. What do you need to know to meet them? You need 4 things: length, width, height, and when you're going to meet them. Length, width, and height, that's usually described as, meet me down the road at the Burger King on such and such street. And we all, you and that person knows where the Burger King is, so you don't do it in length, width, and height. You just give a street address, but that's a physical location within the length, width, and height. You see what I'm saying? But you always add a time. Why? Because you could be there at 1 o'clock and let me rephrase that. You say 7 o'clock. You show up at 7 in the morning and wait around for an hour, and this person's not there. But they show up at 7 o'clock at night and wait around, and you're not there. You see what I'm saying? You've got to specify that time. For two objects to meet in the same place and time, you got to give all those coordinates, length, width, height, and time. But we don't ever think of the time part of it. Because to us, time is linear. Past, present, future. We can remember the past. We can see the here and now, but we can't see into the future in and of ourselves. All right, look at it this way. Here's an analogy. And I've heard this analogy used in quite a few ways by quite a few teachers. And it's probably the best one to understand this. Okay, think of yourself like this. You're standing on a street. In between the two street corners, you're halfway in the middle, and you're standing there and you're watching a parade go by. You see the first float, and it goes by, and if you turn your head and look, you'll see it go around the corner. Going around the corner, that's the future, or excuse me, that's the past. That's what's already went. And you can't see it no more. You can just remember it. You could turn your head to that street corner that they're coming from and turning around to. That's the future. You can't see it until it gets into the present, which is right there in front of you where you're standing on that street, and that's all you can see. And as it moves by, you can only see what's happening in the here and now. That's us on present day. But Elohim Most High, it says he lives in eternity. You got to remember, he's not constrained by the same physical reality that we are. Length, width, height, time. He has no restraint of time. He lives. Eternity is not having a bunch of time. Eternity is living outside the restraint of time. So imagine the same parade, the same street corner, and instead of you standing on the street, you're the news person in a helicopter above filming it. Now guess what? You can look down and see all of the parade. The past, the present, and the future. All at one time. That's God. He lives outside of eternity. Outside of this temporal plane we call time. Okay. And with that thought in mind, if we, like some people believe, we die and go instantly to be with the Lord, and he lives outside of time, see what I'm saying? But if you look at it from our perspective, where everything we see and know gets filtered through this perspective of linear time, we die, but yet the resurrection is not going to happen until a future event from our perspective. So in our minds, the question is, what happens to the person's spirit, his consciousness, when he dies? And since we're constrained by this filter of time that we've all had to deal with our whole lives, we interpret the understanding through that. So we have to deal with it. We're like, okay, if he died here and the future is here when the resurrection happens, what happens in here to it? See what I'm getting at? Maybe it's both. Maybe from our perspective, that person is actually asleep, unaware, not knowing what's going on. But to that person, when they die, they instantaneously go to be with the Lord. In their perspective, in God's perspective. You can't put God in the box of time. See, to us, we have to deal with that gap of time between the time they die and the time they are resurrected. We have to deal with that somehow. Paul, and that word, let's just look it up, shall we? All three places. I'm going to read this again for you. 1 Thessalonians Chapter 4, verse 13, 14, and 15. Every place it says sleep. It's the same Greek word. It says, but I would not have you to be ignorant, brethren, concerning them which are asleep. That's why I emphasized it the first time I read it. That ye sorrow not, even as others which have no hope. Verse 14. For if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so them also which sleep, and Jesus will God bring with him. Verse 15. For this we say unto you, by the word of the Lord, that we which are alive and remain unto the coming of the Lord shall not prevent them which are asleep. Now that word prevent, that's a King Jamesism word, and you read it in our mind, it says something, and we are like, prevent them from sleep. They don't mean stop them. That's not what it means. Let's read that in a different translation. Let's read it in ESV, just so we can understand that better. There's a few places in the King James where the English words, even though it's still English, that word didn't mean what it, 400 something years ago. What is it? 400 years ago when they did it, 1611, when they interpreted that thing, that word meant this in English. Today, it doesn't mean that. It means something completely different. So when we read it, there's words in there like that, and that'll throw you off. But the ESV, that last phrase says this, or verse 17, it says, we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up together with them in the clouds and meet in the air. So will we always be with the Lord. No, wait a minute. That's not the right verse. Verse 15, I'm sorry. For we declare this by the word of the Lord, that we are alive, who are left until the coming of the Lord, will not precede those who have fallen asleep. See how it says precede here? And we understand that. That makes a little bit more sense. Meaning, the ones that are alive, they're not going to get there before the ones that have already died. The ones that have died are going to get there first, and then us. When in the King James it says prevent, and you're like, what, are we going to stop them? No, we're not going to stop them. But anyway, that was a side note. But what I'm getting at is this. That word sleep there, in all three of those verses, is Strong's number G2837. Now let's look that up, shall we? 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse, I can go to 13. Like I said, it's the same word in all three of those verses. We'll define it. I'll see what it says. Like I said, it's Strong's number G2837, and the word is koimao from the Greek. This is what it says in the Strong's Concordance. It said the outline of biblical usages. 1, to cause to sleep, put to sleep. 2, metaphorical sense, to still, calm, quiet. To fall asleep, to sleep, to die. Now you go down here to the Strong's definition where the word is actually defined, and it says this: to put to sleep, i.e. passively or reflexively. To slumber, figuratively, to decease. And then it says be-a, fall-a, or fall on, meaning be asleep, fall asleep, or fall on sleep. And then it says be dead. Like I said, do we go instantly to be with the Lord? Or do we go into a state of torpor, a state of unconsciousness, where we sleep and are not aware of what's going on, of the passage of time? Maybe it's both. It just depends on what perspective you look at it from. To the person and to God, they die, bam, they're with the Lord. But to us on the earth, we have to deal with that amount of time until the resurrection, the rapture, and all that. And we're not going to get into the timing and pre-trib, post. I'm not going to get into all that. That's not what this is about. But to that person, it's instantaneous. They go to be with the Lord because they see it from the perspective in eternity, outside the constraints of time. But we, who are still in the bubble of time, we have to filter it through that. And we see it as a state of torpor, unconsciousness, sleep. Like I said, maybe it's both. I don't know. I looked, and I done some digging on that word, and it doesn't really, other than the way it defines it, and it defines it as both. Now, there are verses like, that same word is used in 1 Corinthians 15:51, where it's talking about the resurrection of the body. And it says, I tell you a mystery, we will not all sleep, but we will be changed in an instant, in a twinkling of an eye. That word there, sleep, it's the same word. It's also used in John chapter 11, when Jesus is talking about Lazarus being asleep. Same word. Now, I'll say this. There are other places in the New Testament where it speaks of, like the one where, what is it, Matthew 9, that's where it is. Matthew chapter 9, where the little girl is dead, and Jesus says, oh, she's not dead, she's asleep. That's not the same word. That's a completely different word. I thought maybe that would be the same. I looked it up. It's not. It's not the same Greek word. So, but they're now, I know some of you are going to, and I looked up a couple of other verses, like where it talks about Jesus being on the cross and the thief. That'd be in Acts. Or not, why did I say Acts? I don't know why I said Acts. That's in John, or Luke. I'm confused. I got so many verses flowing through my head right now. I'm trying to remember what all I looked up. Because as you can tell, I don't really do notes. I write down some things, and I take it and I shoot from the hip. Okay, yeah. And Luke chapter 23, verses 42 and 43. We're all familiar with this. This is the only place in the four Gospels where it talks about the thieves, and the thieves on the cross next to him. And this part is mentioned. This is the only place in the four Gospels. The thief, there was three thieves. Two of them were making fun of him, and one of them believed and knew on some level that this was the Messiah. This is the long-awaited Messiah. And we'll start at verse 39. This is Luke 23. Starting at verse 39. It says, one of the criminals who were, this is the ESV, by the way. I'm going to read out of the ESV on this one. One of the criminals who were hanged railed at him, meaning they made fun of him, saying, are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us. But the other rebuked him, saying, do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? Verse 41. And we indeed justly, for we are receiving due rewards of our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong. Something a lot of people don't point out to you. When that guy, he says that. He says, for we are receiving the due rewards of our deeds. That's a confession. Shh. Ain't nobody ever taught you that, I guarantee you. That's a confession. He's confessing before Jesus that he's done wrong. I ain't never heard anybody point that out when they teach this passage. But anyway, verse 42 and 43, here we go right here. It says, and he said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And he said to him, and Jesus said to him, truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise. Now I know many people point to that passage and say, see, we die, we go to be with the Lord. It says it right there. Now, maybe Jesus was just talking to the guy in the perspective that the guy's going to see it from. Because when the guy dies, he's instantly going to be with the Lord. Instead of Jesus trying to sit, they're hanging on the cross. The guy's probably not in the best condition to sit and listen and learn. So Jesus is not even going to attempt to try to tell him, hey man, what's really going to happen from your perspective and from everybody else's perspective, but it ain't from nobody else's perspective. It's only going to be from that thief's perspective. He's going to die, and instantly he's going to go outside of time into eternity, and it's going to be instantaneous for him. But to us, we got to deal with that time somehow because we are in the restraints of time. Does that make sense? Now, I know some people, there's other places, like, where's one of the other ones? Philippians 1:23. A lot of people, this verse here, I read this one out of King James just because, so I'm here. Let's look it up on the phone. I can do it faster on the phone. This is one of those verses that people, this doesn't even, and this one doesn't even really deal with it, but I'm going to read it anyway because, let's see. This doesn't even apply to it, but I know a lot of people that when this subject comes up, this is one of the verses that comes to their mind. I'll start Philippians 1, I'll start at verse 21. Out of the King James, it says, For to me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain. But if I live in the flesh, this is the fruit of my labor. Yet what I shall choose, I want not. Verse 23. For I am strait betwixt two, having a desire to depart and to be with Christ, which is far better. And some people point to that, and they say, see, instantaneously. Well, actually, if you read it, it doesn't say that. It just says, the desire to depart and be with Christ. It never puts the time factor. It never mentions the time factor. It just says to depart and be with Christ. That could be, from our perspective, a day, a year, a week, however long. There's no time factor in this verse. So that one doesn't really apply. And the other one is 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 6, 7, and 8. And this is the one where it starts off and he's talking about the earthly tent of his body and having a heavenly dwelling. For those who don't know, it's a comparison between the flesh body and the spirit body you're going to get. That's what it's talking about. Well, it goes on to say this in verses 6, 7, and 8. He says, Therefore, we are always confident, knowing that whilst we are at home in the body, we are absent from the Lord. For we walk by faith, not by sight. Verse 8. We are confident, I say, and willing, rather to be absent from the body and to be present with the Lord. See, people want to say that verse speaks of it. Well, it does. It's to be absent from the body, rather to be absent from the body and to be present with the Lord. It's kind of a juxtaposition, but it has no time restraint in it. To be absent from your body is to be present with the Lord. Yeah, I agree with that. But there's no time factor in there. To the person that dies, yes, it's instantaneous. But to us down here on this earth, who have that fence of time, that stronghold of time in our understanding, we can't see it. That's why I say, when you come to the table of interpretation, don't bring your preconceived notions to it. Like I said, 4 dimensions in our reality. I'm gonna read one more verse to you, and this. And I realized this kind of blew my mind. It's Ephesians chapter 3. I'm trying to figure out where I want to start because like Paul writes, when he writes, big long, well, wasn't really no sentences in Greek, but when they translate it into the English, it's like run-on sentence after run-on sentence. It's just really long sentences. So, but it's just it's one nugget in this long string of things he's writing that I want to point out. We'll just start. Verse 18 is where I'm going. I'll start at verse 17. It's out of KJV. Ephesians 3:17. And I'm going to read through 19 just to finish out that little piece. It says, that Christ may dwell in your hearts by faith, that ye, being rooted and grounded in love. Verse 18. May be able to comprehend with all saints what is the breadth and the length and the depth and the height, and to know the love of Christ which passeth knowledge, that ye might be filled with the fullness of God. Let me go back and read that again. Verse 18 only. You may be able to comprehend with all saints what is the breadth and the length and the depth and the height. And notice there's 4 aspects there. Now I know you got length, width, and height. The way it words it in here is length, depth, and height. Now, some people, when they measure, like you hear carpenters or you hear people who have to deal with this stuff on a daily basis, you'll hear some of them say length, height, and width. Length, depth, and height. They use different terms, but it's always 3. It's always 3. How long is it? How high is it? And how wide is it? How long is it? How deep is it? How high is it? You know, like, here you go. I'll visual aid. I'm going to turn around and give you a visual aid. Length, height, depth. Makes sense? Or some people say length, height, and width. Same thing. It's 3 definite. It's 3 dimensions. But that verse, Ephesians 3:18, has 4. Now you can go look them up. None of them speak to time specifically. The only one that would be the first one used there is breadth. It's used 3 places in the New Testament. It's used here, and then it's used in Revelation chapter 20 and Revelation chapter 21. And you could kind of, if you read it over in those verses, like in the one it's talking about the 1,000 years and Satan being locked up, and you just have to go read it. That's for a different thing, different day. But yeah, I hope that answered your question, or at least gave you a different perspective to look at these things, because that one plagued me for a long time until I sat and thought about that, and I realized that, you know, God doesn't live in the constraints of time, and so when we go to be with God after our death, we're no longer constrained by time ourselves, just as He's not. So, you know, maybe it's both. Maybe it's instantaneous to those people, but to us, we have to, because of that constraint of time, we got to deal with it. It causes us to ask the question, the initial question in the first place, because that's all we know. You see what I'm saying? So maybe it's both. Anyway, I hope that blessed you guys. I hope I shed some light onto something. Like I said, I don't know if that's right or not. That's just the way I understand it. Now, somebody out there could probably show me something different and change the way I believe 5 minutes from now. But that's what I think. I think it just depends on what perspective you look at it from. With that, I'll say thanks. Shalom Aleichem. Have a good day. Please like and share our videos. Comment below, either good or bad. But most of all, subscribe. The little circle icon at the bottom right hand of the screen. It's got a picture of a cow's face. Thanks. Shalom Aleichem, brothers and sisters.